Welcome to the Leaderish podcast with your hosts, Regina and Doris.
Hey Doris, how's it going?
Hey, Regina, it's going very well. You're in a great mood today.
Well, yeah, because first of all, my dear friend Jennifer is with us. And as I hit record on our episode today, I was clearing my throat and making funny noises, and I was on mute, and it was hilarious. And I got myself tickled, and I think you got tickled because you could see me. But I'm super excited about being here today with Jennifer Miller, who is not only one of the most amazing brains that I have the honor of being friends with, but I also have the honor of calling her friend. Jennifer, welcome. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your background and a little bit about yourself, and then we'll talk about what we're going to talk about today?
First, thank you, Regina and Doris, for inviting me to be a guest on your podcast. I'm so excited. I truly was looking forward to this time that we have together to record, in part because, as Regina already said, we're friends. We live down the street from each other. We should just be in the same room, actually, but we're not.
Yeah, well, because I don't know how to do that.
Either.
I don't know how to do a podcast in the same room. So this is what we get.
So I'm excited. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much for letting me come on to your podcast. And yes, name is Jennifer Miller. I am the co-founder and managing partner of a management consulting firm called Millan Chicago. And we were founded in Chicago. The question I always get is, why is Chicago in your name? We were founded in Chicago, and when we went to register, somebody had already taken the word Millan, the company name Millan, so we just slapped Chicago on it and called it a day. So that's why we have the name Chicago in our business.
I had no idea.
Yeah. We are a data analytics company firm that helps organizations make data-driven decisions about their workforce. And we're really concerned about talent and looking at the employee experience, making sure that you're retaining great talent and that your turnover is optimal for your company, whatever that may be.
Love that. And I want to share my introductory story and how I met Jennifer. I was at yet another networking event. As all our listeners know, I go to way too many networking events. And I think I was ready to leave. I was saying goodbye to people, and Jennifer was standing there, and I decided to say hello on my way out the door, and we wound up having just a quick 5-minute conversation. And I think in that 5 minutes, we discovered that we had a mutual friendship with Regina. And you and I set up a time to talk a little bit further and to get to know each other. And we had a conversation maybe a couple weeks later, and you started telling me your story about data and the importance of data, and that data can tell a story. And I immediately thought, oh, I've got to have you on the podcast. I told Regina about it, and she said, well, I've been wanting to have Jennifer on the podcast for years. And so it worked out really well that we both mutually decided we needed to have you on because data does tell a story. Half of my brain is a marketing brain. So I'm a communications person, a marketing person, and I know the importance of data and that data can tell a very valuable story. And that's what you and I talked about. And I'd love for you to maybe share a little bit more about what that means in practice. So data sounds like it could be very boring, but when you tie it with a story, you tie it together with a story, it becomes the most fascinating thing you'd ever want to know about.
I think that's really critical is when we're thinking about data, the first thing that we typically think about when we're backing up is, what kind of data are we using, right? So if we're talking about an organization, and let's just talk about data with respect to employees or talent, one of the first things that we always have to think about is, what are we actually measuring? And because there's a whole measurement process at the very front end of this, and making sure what you're measuring is valid and reliable. Is it measuring what you intend to measure? So for example, like one of the things that I've been engaged in a lot of conversations with recently is this concept of culture. A lot of folks have been asking, I would love to have a measurement around culture. And my first question always is, how do you define culture? And I usually get really big eyes. Like, wait a minute, how do we define culture? So what does it mean for an organization to say, I want to measure our culture, or I want to measure the perception of our culture? We have to know, how are you defining this concept of culture? And it's like that for any other concept that you're thinking about with respect to work. So engagement, for example. Engagement is a very common one that gets measured, whether it's on an annual basis, a quarterly basis. And if you look at some of these large firms giving the engagement surveys out, they all have different ways of measuring this concept of culture. Now, you and I can probably agree that it's around jobs or managers, around how an organization communicates or benefits. There's a lot of core things that, in terms of overlap, that we would say engagement is part of your job, how satisfied you are, training opportunities available for you. But before we get to that data piece, which is initially your question, how can we use data for storytelling? We first really have to tackle this huge hurdle. How do we measure whatever it is that we're interested in measuring or defining in terms of the data? And so that's really the first piece before we even get to collecting the data or collecting the information, whether it's subjective, like engagement or satisfaction, or objective, the number of times I'm doing something. We really have to make sure that measurement issue or measurement challenge is really solidified.
What I notice a lot, and this is me because I worked in a very large organization. I was a cog in the wheel. I was middle management. I wouldn't even say that I was an executive leader, but I was not a lower level leader, but a middle upper level leader. The thing that I noticed is that leaders that were in my space, they had no input into the questions that are being asked where we're collecting data and different surveys and different things like that. They didn't have any input into what was being asked, yet these leaders are asked to affect change for the organization, but they're not even sure why those questions were asked or what to do to even figure out the change. So how can we help those middle level leaders to get more out of the information and the survey data that an organization might collect?
Sure. So you're assuming the data is already collected. I, as a leader, am just getting the results. Is that the assumption?
Right. I think that's the assumption for most of our listeners. Oh, we took this survey. I don't even know where it came from. And now I'm being asked to take action on it, or I have to do something about these low scores or support these high scores or whatever that looks like.
And so let's say we're already past that design phase and measurement definition, how we're actually defining whatever the measurement is, and we have the information, the data collected. And really, there's a couple of different ways that can proceed. One of the things that I hope is going on is that when you get these scores back, let's just take an engagement survey. If you're getting the engagement survey, a lot of times those results will be presented at the organizational level. Here's how your organization is doing, whatever that looks like, however that was measured. And here are some of the domains. So here's how folks feel about their job, or here's how they feel about training and development. And one of the things we try to collect are some of these job characteristics. So how many years have you been working at the organization? Which functional area are you in? Are you in HR? Are you in the law? Are you in operations, marketing, whatever the case may be?
Sure.
And a lot of times, if it's a large organization, those results can actually be examined with respect to an area. And so let's say we're going to look at just the marketing area and see what their engagement scores look like. And one of the challenges with that, of course, at least some of the principles that we have in place for our firm, is that you have to have so many people in that area in order to look at those results. So let's just take law, for example, because that's a really common one where we only need 5 people in the area of law. Let's say you only have 2 individuals that participate in the survey. Because there aren't enough individuals, we actually wouldn't give law their own scores. Right, which is really challenging for a leader if they're in that area, because then they have to look at the entire organization. But if you are in an area where maybe you have enough individuals that you can get the results for whether it's your own team or your own department or own area, I think there's a couple of questions that you want to look at or that you want to ask yourself. And first, it's really looking at, okay, where does my team stand in relation to everyone else across the organization? Is that higher? Is that lower? Is it the same? And I think you can benchmark within your organization to really start to understand, is this an area of opportunity? Is this something that I need to improve on, for example, within my team? And so let me give you an example. Compensation always comes up, right? And so if you ask folks, do you feel like you are adequately compensated? Some folks might say they agree. Some might say yes or no, or I don't really know. And so if you have a particular team, if you're looking at just the team results, for example, and you compare that with the entire organization, and it's about the same, right? They all have similar perceptions of that, then that might be something that you need to work at the organizational level, right? Because that's not necessarily something that you can tackle at the team level. And so I think it's important for leaders to look at the results in relation to their own team and other ways within the organization to see, is this something I should take care of for my own team? Or is it something that is more at the organizational level? And so things that we commonly see within a team are things like, my leader doesn't give me feedback on a regular basis. That's something definitely that the leader can act upon, something that they're in control of, right? But something like compensation or benefits, that's more at the organizational level.
There were a number of things that I wanted to unpack with everything you just said. And I was involved in doing an employee survey at an organization where I worked, and I was able to help out select the questions that we wanted to ask and to group the employees because it was a smaller organization. And we knew that they had to have at least, and I don't remember the exact number, it might have been 5 or 6 people in that particular section. And there were some sections we knew there were only 1 or 2. And that was important not to only use the answers from that 1 or 2 person group, because number one, from a confidentiality standpoint, they might not be honest about answering those questions if they thought, they're going to know that I answered those questions based on the answers that I provided. So I can't answer honestly because they're going to know who I am. And so I think it's important when you go into a survey like that you make sure the employees understand this is 100% confidential. And your personal answers, even if you write a sentence out, they won't know that it's you unless you say, I'm Doris and I'm answering it this way. Then they might know it's you. But if you answer it confidentially or you answer it in a very generic way, they shouldn't know that it's you. And if you have a small enough group, then you want to maybe lump them together. So you mentioned legal. You're right. In a lot of organizations, the legal department is going to have 1 or 2 people. And the finance group might only have 1 or 2 people. Okay, perhaps we lump legal and finance together so that we can come up with a group of 5 people. So I think it's important that our listeners understand that these surveys are taken in confidentiality so that people can answer honestly.
I think one thing that I do want to add is this notion between how do you communicate this to the employees? And so you mentioned confidential. And one of the things that we talk to folks about is, do you want this to be anonymous too? Because the feedback that I hear from the workforce is, I'm concerned that maybe it's confidential, but it's not anonymous. And so I just don't feel comfortable because if my name can be tied to the results or to how I answer in the survey, then I just don't feel like I can be honest and transparent because I'm worried about what actions will they take on me. One of the reasons why folks use vendors is to be both confidential and also anonymous so that it's not even tied to anything in the organization's HR system or anything that can be tied back to an employee. And so it's one thing. So those are things just to think about and to consider if you're embarking on the survey initiatives in your organization. When you're communicating to employees, how would you like this to be received? And a lot of times you can get that information before you even start the communication process.
Thank you for pointing that out because I think I was using that word interchangeably, the confidential and anonymous, and I was not clear enough. And I did mean anonymous.
Okay.
So yes, it's confidential, but I also meant anonymous, that the employees need to be notified that these are anonymous answers so that they can have that confidence in answering as honestly as possible. So thank you for clarifying that.
I have seen situations where they don't want it to be anonymous. So, for example, if you're looking at the employee's experience within an organization and you are really interested in looking and gathering information across the year and so maybe there's a survey after onboarding, maybe there's a survey quarterly, and they want to track how you feel in your responses and what that predicts, whether that's in terms of performance or retention. And so there are some cases made for, hey, we're going to have this confidential, but we're not actually going to have this anonymous because we want to actually look at your entire experience throughout the year or two. And that's what we're concerned about looking at.
But the point is we want to be upfront, or the organization needs to be upfront on whether this is confidential and or anonymous or none of the above.
Completely agree. And I think that's a really great point, Doris.
Mm-hmm.
So when we get this data typically, and I know that you focus mainly in the HR space, right? The people analytics space and really understanding the workforce better. What kinds of data can we use to tell the story of our organization through our people?
So one of the first questions I would probably ask you is, what story are you trying to tell? What are you trying to get at? Are you trying to look at big buckets of whether it's retention or whether it's turnover or whether it's the employee experience? What is it that you're really interested in understanding and telling a story about?
Those were three. You said retention, turnover, and employee experience. Those are three different stories that we could tell based on the data. And a lot of organizations collect this type of data and do nothing with it. I worked with an organization who had a pretty high turnover rate. Their employees were leaving and they were collecting the data. And what they realized is that the employees who had been there less than 2 years were the ones that were leaving. And they were leaving at record paces, except the ones who had been there for 15 and 20 years, they weren't going anywhere. And they may have been the ones that actually needed to move on because they needed some fresh blood. And so what it allowed them to do is, just by understanding some of that data, they looked at gender and stuff like that. But really the thing that they noticed was employees under 2 years who were leaving. And what that does is it helps them target what happens in those first 2 years. So now they can look at digging in with those employees who are new to figure out how to adjust their experience so that hopefully they'll stay around a little bit longer than just 2 years. It's costly to replace employees every 2 years, right?
Sure. And I think one of the things that we would want to do is dig in a little bit more. Why are they, and you alluded to this, Regina, is why are they leaving within 2 years?
Yeah.
Right. And
That's
so, and we always get asked, what are methodologies that you can use to really try and understand that? Because now we're doing more of a retrospective approach, right? So they've left. And what some folks will do is do exit surveys or exit interviews. Not necessarily internal, but they might get a vendor for that to really understand, why is it that you're leaving? Give us that information. Again, whether it's anonymous, confidential, making sure that they feel comfortable enough so that then they can try and target what's going on in those 2 years so that we can try and fix the challenge that we're having of folks leaving so soon within an organization.
Regina, you said something else, though, that was really interesting. You said we're not necessarily using the data. And Jen, you and I had this discussion as well, that so often organizations want to know an answer. They get the answer. They don't like the answer, and they do nothing with the data in order to fix what's wrong with the organization. Can you talk a little bit about that and how often it happens and what leaders can do differently to use the data to make a positive change in the organization?
Yeah. So
Good one, Doris.
thanks for that reminder, Doris, because we did have that conversation. And so first, I want to just recognize and acknowledge the fact that no one likes bad news, including the three of us.
No.
No.
I don't like it.
Like,
We don't.
who wants to hear bad news? No one. And so oftentimes when we deliver some maybe unfavorable news to leaders, they really internalize that and they take it personally that it is their fault that the employees feel this way. And
And it might be their fault.
of course, it might be their fault. But if you think about, I'm delivering this news to somebody, and when you get bad news, how do you process that information? What do you think about? And what's your initial reaction? Is your initial reaction, how can we help and change this so that we can turn it around? Or is it, wait a minute, you start to become really defensive?
A lot of times it's
Yes.
blame.
Yeah.
That is our
Right.
initial reaction. It's blame and pointing
Right.
fingers and trying to get the spotlight off
Right.
of us.
It's not my fault. It's because this other
Yeah.
leader told me to do something, or it's from the top, or that poor C level. They're always getting blamed for a lot of stuff. That's the initial thing is reaction is that, wait a minute, I either feel bad, I don't want to hear this, or it's somebody else's fault. And so it's hard. Once we overcome that hurdle and here are opportunities, if we frame it in terms of opportunities, how lucky are you that the employees told you this is something that you need to fix? So if you turn it around, that your employees feel comfortable enough that they're willing to give you this feedback. And really what employees are looking for is for you to listen and for you to communicate, I heard you, I see the results, and this is what we're going to do. Now, one of the things to acknowledge is you can't do everything within the first 30 days of a survey or getting the results. And there might be limitations to what you can actually do. So resources, maybe some things cost a lot of money, or it's just not in the budget right now, or we can't build out a whole new cafeteria. We don't have the space for that. There's just serious limitations. But if you communicate with the employees, these are things that we can actually work on. And this is what you can expect from us. And you communicate that out to them. So that's more of a conversation as opposed to, I'm just going to have you do the survey and then I'm going to put the results in a drawer because I don't like what they said. That's going to impact what happens the next time you want to collect information from the employees. And it is hard, but it's an ongoing conversation about how to use that information.
Yeah, and you said something important, communication. So even if the answer is no, a lot of times the employees are okay with being told, no, we can't build this cafeteria right now. We know that you want better food options, and here's why we can't do it right now. We appreciate that you shared this with us, and we will put this as a future consideration as this organization grows, that we can build a better cafeteria maybe 5 years down the road. But thank you for sharing that. Continue to provide that type of feedback to us because we want to hear it. And here's why we can't do it right now. And I think employees appreciate that so much, even if the answer is no. And I know as humans, a lot of times even if we know that the answer is no, if we have the why behind the no, we feel a lot better about that no.
Yes, you're exactly right. So when we work with organizations, most of the time, a lot of times we hear from employees, we just don't know why a decision was made. What is going on? All we want to know is why something is occurring. And I know it takes time. It takes time and leaders are busy and it does take time to explain this is why we're doing what we're doing, or this is why I've made the decision. And sometimes you can't do that, right? You're making so many decisions from day to day. But in situations like this, where you can actually explain this is why we can't do it, I think it would be much better received, and it often is much better received. So you're completely right, Doris.
I think a lot of times it comes down to transparency and trust.
Yeah.
And I see that too with organizations, because a lot of organizations ask their employees, whether it's a pulse survey or it's even through their check-in process or upwards feedback or the full employee engagement survey, whatever that looks like for the organization, a lot of organizations ask the employees if they trust the executive team.
Yeah. And that's the most honest answers too.
You do, because really, if I'm a mid-level manager, who's going to come hunt me down if I don't trust our CEO? I'm 6 layers or 4 layers or 3 layers away from that person. I'm going to probably be pretty honest about that question. What's interesting to me is the reason I think often that our employees don't trust the C-suite is because the C-suite isn't transparent. And the lack of transparency leads to the lack of trust, which leads to overall lower engagement scores, not just there in that question, but throughout the organization. And when you have lower engagement scores and you don't do anything about it, or you don't communicate and you're not transparent, then they just get lower and lower. There is a key factor, I believe, between transparency and what you can be transparent with and how you communicate with your employees and the results that you receive from many of these surveys. And by the way, somebody leaving is a survey result, essentially. That is another piece of data. People doing more work, getting more done, that is a piece of data. People hitting their goals and being more productive, that is a piece of data. Data doesn't always have to come from a survey. Data can come from a million different places. And once you've eroded the trust and transparency between the leadership and the employees, that's where all of these data points start going down, I believe.
One of the things that we've been working on is trying to understand what predicts engagement. If you think about it in an organizational context, there's a lot of things going on, your job, the team that you're on, just the organization itself, the culture, the manager or their manager. And one of the things that they've shown overall is that the job itself is one of those core components that predicts higher levels of engagement, also the overall company. And there's some data to suggest that it's also the team, and the manager, I think, is still out in terms of what's going on. I think in some industries, the manager makes a huge difference. In other industries where maybe it's not clear in terms of who the manager is, maybe they're working in a manufacturing plant where they have a lot of different supervisors, a lot of folks that they're reporting to. That's a little bit less clear. It's a little muddy. But if you have a typical structure. And so thinking through, to your point, Regina, what actually predicts engagement? And not only what predicts engagement, but also what does that predict? And so starting to bring in performance, for example. So whether those are performance ratings by the manager, whether that's some sort of objective output that you can actually measure. So for example, if you're in a plant, I'm producing so many widgets, that's something that I can count. It's not necessarily subjective in terms of your overall performance, but starting to think through even things like attendance, the number of days that you call and that you can't be in the office. So that's going to impact your overall wellness and health. And so there's a lot of ways that you can start to combine and look at other sources of data beyond just participation on a survey, like you had mentioned. And you can start to see what's that overall picture and how we're looking at turnover, retention, performance, productivity. Productivity is going to be huge and really important to the C-level. And that's something that they're going to be really interested in. HR folks might be more concerned about retention and turnover. But I think there's a lot of things that you can't, back to your point, Regina, there's a lot of things that we can measure and that we can collect, and we can start to build what we call these models to see what the impacts of all of this truly are.
You're talking about, like, we've got all these different pockets of data. How do you pull all of that information together to tell the full story instead of just the retention story or the attrition story that I spoke of, right? Or the engagement story that I spoke of, but instead telling a holistic employee story for an organization based on all the data, not just little pockets, where I think is where most organizations get it wrong, is they focus on one data point instead of the overall big picture. And again, your mind, it just amazes me. What does this data tell us? And then what does that data tell us? And what does this data tell us? And then how do we get here? And what does that mean? And where did that come from? The curiosity that you come to the table with is just unbelievable. And you think in ways that I never think to think. I do think in more small pockets of information. And you always open up my brain to how different things stitch together and come together. And what's the question behind the question? And how can you dig deeper and deeper and deeper? Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. And
You're
I
way
just,
too kind.
as you can
Can't
tell,
stop you.
no, you can tell I just have this huge aha moment because I was coming at this as bits of information that you collect and telling stories about the bits. And then you just, in some magical way, brought it all together. Well, you got to put those bits together to tell the full story.
Yeah, and it's a
You
I
can't
think
just tell a bit of a story.
I think this might segue really nicely into my next question, because the next question I was going to ask was about your background, Jen, and that it's on psychological science. And I think some of this has to do with your background and your passion on psychology and psychological science. And maybe you can talk a little bit about that passion and how that all comes together to create this bigger story, and then how organizations can use that bigger story to strategically make some shifts in the organization to improve employee engagement on a more holistic basis.
Yeah. So first, I want to thank you, Regina. You're way too kind to Doris's question. I was very fortunate and went to graduate school at Indiana University. I received my doctorate in the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences. My concentration was in learning and communication. And at the same time, this going through the economic crash, my advisors recommended that I also get a master's in statistics. Part of this had to do with some of the research I was interested in. I was really fascinated by social interactions and how that could impact vocal learning. And this was in birds, if you can imagine. So I know this is random, but we studied the birds in aviaries. So if you think about a football field, in a quarter of the football field, we had this large aviary, and we would have flocks in all the aviaries, and we would gather data. And then we had to do something with these social interactions. And one of the best ways to analyze bird data is using network science. So network analyses. Remember back in the old days when we had Facebook and there was this little app where you could see how you were connected to folks and how folks were connected to the folks you were connected to, and you could see this entire network, and it was complex and it was fun because I could see, oh, I'm connected to Regina, and Regina actually knows somebody in my family 5 states away.
Of
And
Kevin Bacon.
Yeah. Yes.
Exactly at the same time. That was hilarious. And Kevin Bacon.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
But
Go
we
ahead,
did this
Jennifer.
with birds, okay? So if you can imagine, not Kevin Bacon in humans, but with birds. When they suggested that, I thought, I'll go off to the stats department and see what they have. And I was really fortunate because at the time, Stan Wasserman, who is one of the fathers of network science, started a statistics department at Indiana University. And as part of the department, he also decided to have a master's degree that you could do while you were earning your doctorate. And so I decided to jump on that bandwagon and just try to get this master's in statistics, and chipped away every year I was there for the doctorate. I would just take a class or two so that it could be added to the statistics degree. And lo and behold, by the time I finished out the dissertation, I also had the master's in statistics. And I ended up combining psychology and statistics. I got a faculty job at the Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago, which is how I got up to Chicago after Bloomington. And then after I received tenure, I decided to start this firm, and we essentially combine psychology and analytics to help organizations. The other co-founder, Ron Landis, he also has a PhD in psychology, but his concentration is in an area of psychology called industrial organizational psychology. And what this is essentially studying human behavior at work. We decided to start this firm, and we help all kinds of organizations, nonprofits, for-profit. We do a lot of community work as well. And we just decided to combine these two fields. We have a very strong background in human behavior and cognition, motivation, trying to understand why folks are doing the things they're doing, but also with the analytics side. How do we measure human behavior? How can we put this all together and predict a really key important outcome? And so to your point, Doris, growing up in this academic environment and having to try and get tenure, you have to publish. a lot of articles. And so it's part of that mindset, that research mindset that we really bring into the firm, and that is the foundation of our firm, is always using the scientific method, process, and a lot of the projects that we're doing with organizations.
But you left out the birds.
I didn't leave out the birds.
I think that is really important information to bring to the table, that also if you need help with birds, you guys are there too. It's just, it's quite fascinating.
Yeah, so I had amazing advisors in graduate school, and they in terms of their research careers, they were really one of the first ones to demonstrate the impact of social interactions on vocal learning in cowbirds. And if anyone is a birder out there, they know.
Did you say cowbirds?
Cowbirds. They don't raise their own young. So they're very fascinating just from a developmental standpoint, because they don't raise their own young, and they lay their eggs in other birds' nests, and then those birds raise the cowbird.
Wait, is it cowbirds that are other cowbirds raising them, or is it like a sparrow and a robin?
Yeah, sparrows, robins, cardinals.
Whatever. Stop it. Really?
Fascinating.
And you might be wondering, why don't they just eject the cowbird out of the nest?
I am wondering.
And our
that.
response is, what's the probability that is not your nestling? That didn't come from you, because all nestlings sort of look the same. All baby birds look the same when they hatch. The eggs may look different. It's really interesting because they've done other studies where they've shown that cowbirds will actually lay their eggs in other birds' nests that are slightly smaller, so that their young will have a better chance of survival, because the birds will feed the bigger nestlings, because they're
No way. Okay, this reminds me of the book, Have You Seen My Mother?
Yes.
It is a children's book. It's like a board book that I used to read to my kids. I want to say it's Dr. Seuss, but I don't think it's Dr. Seuss.
No, it's not Dr. Seuss, but I do
but
remember
it's in
that
that same
book.
vein.
Yeah.
It's through his publishing company, but he didn't write it. And it's a little bird that goes around to the cow. Interesting that we're talking about cowbirds. Are you my mother? You're not my mother. Not have you seen my mother? It's Are You My Mother? I'm Not Your Mother. I'm Not Your Mother, I think is the name of the book. Anyway, that is like all I'm thinking about right now. Are you my mother? No, I'm not your mother. I'm a cow.
Yeah. So my advisors actually had an infant lab too, because there's similar mechanisms in terms of how babies and birds learn their vocalizations. And so that...
Wait, so they just kept babies in a lab?
Stop it.
I think there's something fundamentally wrong with this, Jennifer.
No, parents and babies would come to the lab.
Got it. Okay.
You got this.
Okay.
You got this.
Okay.
That's the background that I'm coming from and bringing.
Love it. Oh my gosh, I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, we could go for a whole nother hour.
I was like, this is off. I'm sorry, I'm derailing.
Which is amazing, because that's when it gets the best. I'm pretty sure of that. 99% of the time, it gets the best when it's completely off topic. Cowbirds, bird networking, and have you met my mother? Or how do you know my mother? Or whatever the whole thing is. I don't know. There has been so much ground covered here. I had my big aha moment, which everyone got to experience. Doris, what was your big aha moment from today's episode?
I loved hearing the psychological background, and I am so impressed that you got your doctorate and your master's, and we should have been calling you Dr. Jennifer the entire time.
He won't let
I
you.
won't let you. Doris or Regina already knows this. I don't go by Dr. Miller.
But I'm just so impressed with your background and all of the work and the studies that you've done. And I think that's my aha moment, is just learning everything. I want to learn more of your background and everything that you know. I loved hearing from you and learning from you today.
All right, folks, that's about all we have time for today. Jennifer Miller, thank you so much for being here with us. We have loved talking to you about just about everything that we could think about today. As you're listening today, we would love to hear from you, and we'd love to talk to you. All of our links can be found in the show notes. Please reach out to us. You can follow us on this journey as we delve into all things leadership. We also love a review. You can review us on YouTube. Make sure you like and subscribe to YouTube to get our latest episodes delivered to you. You can also find us wherever you get your podcasts in audio form. And we'd love a 5-star review through there, whether it's Apple Podcast or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're interested in being a guest, send us an engaging topic to leaderishpodcast@gmail.com, and we'll get back to you and chat with you. We love having guests. So with that, I will say cheers. Cheers.